welcome to another exciting show, the Jimi Blanchard Show. I got a special guest, Steve Hanks. We're going to talk about how to trace your family tree of African American family trees. So we're going to talk for an hour and just dig in and see how to get started, what we need to do, how important it is, and why is it important for us to do this. So we sit back and relax and enjoy yourself. And welcome to the show, Steve. I appreciate it.
Jimmy, good to see you again.
All right, man.
Good to see you.
So you wrote another book, huh?
Yeah, part two. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The first one I did in 2005, and but when you start doing your family information and family history, there's so much new information that keeps coming out.
Right.
And so I had to rewrite it because I was learning new information, new clues, and startling information. So I decided to revise it because I don't know if you remember the first one that I did. I had a little bit of little fiction and fact together.
Right.
But this one, I took all the fiction out, because I was trying to make a storyline. And I said, I'm just going to just stick to just, factual information. And so I decided to, put this one together here. It came out, in May of this year. And so it's called Akee Tree.
Okay. What's that mean? Explain that title.
Right. Well, Akee Tree, that's an African word. Akee is a fruit tree in Africa.
What part of Africa?
West Africa.
West Africa.
Yeah,
Okay.
it grows around between Ghana and Ivory Coast, and it's a fruit tree that was brought over on the slave ships to Jamaica.
Oh, okay.
So if you go over to Jamaica today and you say, I want to get some Akee, some people pronounce it Akee, so you could say Akee or Akee, but it's like the national dish over in Jamaica, and they say it tastes like scrambled eggs.
Oh, wow.
But it's a fruit.
Oh, wow.
But it was brought over on the slave ship, but it is indigenous to West Africa.
Do it taste good? Have you tasted it?
I've never tried it.
Oh,
I've never tried it. No, my auntie on my mother's side, my mother's sister, she went over to Jamaica a few times. She sent me some photographs of it. She said it tastes good.
Okay.
And I guess they put it with the codfish. So you put codfish and Akee and put that together, they say it's off the hook. So I'm gonna have to try it.
Okay. Let me know how it tastes.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long did it take to get the second one up and running?
Oh, the second one, it just kind of kicked off right from the first one because while I was finishing the first one, new information was coming out.
Right.
But I wanted to get the first one done because I wanted to get it out there,
Right.
And just have an accomplishment that I did all this research. And the last I remember talking to you about it, I started in 1989.
Right.
And it took me about 12 years to finally get to where I ended up, finding an African ancestor, which I never thought I would even do. I mean, when I first started out doing this, that wasn't even my goal because I didn't even think it was even possible.
Right.
I was just doing it just for the curiosity, just to try to find out. Basically, it was on my dad's side of the family because nobody ever talked about his side of the family.
Right.
So I just started out like that. So it was like 12 years on that one. And then as I was finishing that book up, the new information started coming out. And so probably around 2007 to this year, that's when I finished up this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow,
So,
that's pretty amazing. I remember, like you said, we talked the last time. You said your bloodline goes in and out through Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, he's part in there. He's partly in
Abraham
there.
Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln's partly in there, yeah.
And Oprah Winfrey's family.
Oprah Winfrey, not really related to her by blood, but we came out of the same Mississippi county.
Wow.
Her slave ancestors and my slave ancestors, they both came out of slavery about the same time out of the same Mississippi county.
Wow.
And what's interesting about her is when I went back to Mississippi to go to the courthouse and go to the archives there in Jackson, Mississippi, and then I went up to the little small town where my family came out of, this little small town called Duck Hill, Mississippi, which originally was in Carroll County, and then they changed it to Montgomery County, and that's where it's called today, is Montgomery County, Mississippi. But when I went back to Duck Hill, I started talking to the locals there and some of my cousins, and they were telling me about this story, that there was a story about a woman named Baker who was a freed woman, and she had a son, and she had been killed by these two men whose last name was Winfrey.
Wow.
And I started getting interested in this story. I didn't know if it was true story. It could have been folklore, how people embellish stories. But I was thinking, this woman could have been my relative, because I I was there to do research, so I said, let me look into this story a little bit more, you know. And I wasn't even thinking about Oprah Winfrey. I was just thinking about, you know, the story about this woman named Baker. So as I got to talking to a little bit more of the locals and whatnot, they said, yeah, there were two men. They were both Caucasian men, and they was around the time of after the Civil War, and they had got into an altercation with this African American freed woman and shot her.
Oh, wow.
And I guess to escape being caught by the court at that time, they fled to Texas. Is what the story went. So I wanted to find out about it. So I started investigating it, and then that's when I came across Oprah Winfrey, that her people were in the same county, not in the same town, but in the same county. Actually, she was in another county called Choctaw originally, and then they changed the name to Montgomery, so it's all incorporated in the same county now. But these two men that I told you about named Winfrey, their father was Absalom Winfrey. And I started looking it up, and make a long story short, I found out some information about her. Well, her people are already pretty much public record, because she had a special on PBS in 2006, 2007 called African American Lives, and she talked about her family. You know, Constantine Winfrey was her, I believe that was her great-great-grandfather or great-grandfather. So she mentioned about that, and Constantine Winfrey was a slave brought to Mississippi from Georgia in which was he brought? He was brought over in I think 1850s.
Okay.
As a young man, and eventually he married this woman named Violet. So it was Constantine and Violet Winfrey. So as I was doing my research, I says, well, let me go ahead and include a chapter in my book on that, because we came out of the same area. And so I found some really good information about Constantine's wife, Violet. And I won't spill the beans now, but you know, if you get the book, it will be in there. But when they were doing the show for Oprah Winfrey, you know, one of the associate producers contacted me and asked me if I could provide some information, you know, because they had heard about my first book. So I said, sure, you know, go ahead and use whatever you'd like. And Dr. Henry Louis Gates was the one that was hosting that program.
Oh, wow.
So they used a little bit of it, and then the parts that they didn't use, I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and put it in mine. So
that's cool.
Well, yeah, it was interesting. It was very, very interesting.
It's real important to know where we came from. Just like you said, Oprah Winfrey, that she's a nationally known person and name, and Tom Hanks, and 16th President Abraham Lincoln. So it crisscrosses all the way from, like you said, from Africa down to the southern states of the United States to here, you know. So how long did it take you to trace all that, and where did you begin?
Okay, it all began in 1989. I was visiting my dad, or visiting my parents' house. They still are alive. They're over in North Portland. And so I was over there visiting one summer, and we was watching the baseball game. And I wasn't into genealogy. I wasn't into family history. I didn't know anything. But my dad, he pulled out this envelope. It was a letter that he had got from his cousin. My dad, he was born in Manhattan, Kansas. And then he, after he got out of high school, he joined the Navy. And he went to Guam and the Pacific Islands and so forth. And then he ended up getting stationed here in Astoria, Oregon. And so that's why he made Oregon his home. He, you know, once he got discharged, he just decided he just wanted to make his roots here in Portland. So he got a letter from a cousin in Manhattan, Kansas, and it was an obituary, a death notice. One of his close cousins had died of a heart attack, and his name was Mert Hanks Jr., and he was the first African-American mayor of Manhattan, Kansas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he served as mayor from like 1972 to like 78, somewhere in there. And so he had passed away, and so the cousin had sent him this information. So my dad handed me the envelope. He says, I want you to read this. So I started reading it, and I'm looking at all these names of people. I said, I never even known I had all these relatives back, you know, back in the Midwest, Kansas,
and
Missouri.
This is all Hanks.
This is all Hanks's. I says, I didn't, you know, so that's what got me curious. So from there, I just started asking Dad questions about it, and you know, Dad, he came from a small family. There's a picture of him actually here, a picture of him and my mom actually.
see if you can get that vine for us, please.
Yeah.
I don't know if you might be able to zoom in.
You may not be able to get that one. It's a little small one, but
yeah.
he has a picture of him when he was in the Navy, and then of
Okay.
course my mom,
Okay.
Fern, and her sister-in-law Gladys McCoy. And you know Gladys, she's was a well-known public figure here in Portland area. She was
Right.
county commissioner,
Yeah.
you know, and on the
Yeah.
Portland School Board. And of course her
Right.
husband, Uncle Bill McCoy, you know,
Mhm.
Oregon State Senator.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I found out that that my father's, his father was born in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in a little town called Osage City.
Mm-hmm.
And I never met my grandfather, my father's father. I never met him. You know, he
Right.
died when I was like 1 year old.
Yeah.
So I never got a chance to meet him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, which is probably why we never talked about the family, because
Mhm.
most of his family pretty much all passed away when I
Yeah.
was growing up.
Right.
Only ones I ever knew was my mother's family.
Mm-hmm.
So I says, well, Dad, do we have relatives still back in Osage City, you know, Kansas? He says, I don't really know. He said, I have cousins in Manhattan, Kansas, but I don't know about Osage City. So
Wow.
one day I picked up the telephone and I called the public library. And
So
called-
this is before the internet. So you
this was before the internet,
so
yeah.
you was doing it the hard way.
The hard way,
The
yeah.
hard
the
way
hard
investigation.
way. I'm trying to tell you, you didn't have no mouse that you could click and Google. This is like, you know, 1989, 1990.
You had to go to the public
You
records.
had to go to public records and look at the
libraries,
papers,
counties,
yeah,
and all that.
exactly.
Okay.
So I called the operator. I says, give me the number to the library in Osage City. And the operator says, well, they don't have a library in Osage City. The closest one is in this other town called Linden. I said, give me that number. I want to find out something. So they gave me the number. I called them, and I spoke to the librarian. And I says, yeah, I'm trying to find out about my family history. This
Right.
family named Hanks.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, well, you know, that's funny. She says, we just finished a book on the histories of the families in Osage City.
Oh wow.
And give me 1 minute. I'm going to just put you on hold. Give me 1 minute. I'm going to look it up and see if there's anything about Hanks in there.
Mm-hmm.
And she came back 5 minutes later. She said, you know, there's a woman named Myrtle Hanks Foster, and she just wrote an article about some of her people that was named Hanks. And so I said, could you please read a couple of paragraphs? And I don't want to take a lot of your time, but can you just give me a little bit of information? So maybe this might be a connection.
Right.
So she started reading off the names. And of course, my father's father, which I have a picture of
Okay.
here, which you probably may not be able to see it, but my dad's father, his name was Hugh, Hugh Hanks, the one that was born in Osage City. He was born in 1896.
Right.
And so the librarian started reading off these names to me. She says, well, there was a family named Hanks that came out to Kansas from Mississippi, and they had 13 children.
Oh man.
And she started reading off the names. She said there was Sue, James, Clifford, Grandison,
Oh wow.
John, Eliza,
Yeah.
Mert. And then when I heard Mert, I says, Mert, okay. And then she says, Hugh. And I says, that's my grandfather.
Oh man.
And she says, well, she said, these are probably your people. I'd be happy to mail this to you.
Right.
And she just sent it in an envelope, no charge. And so I got it in the mail a few days later. And that's, you know, how I found out, you know, the names of my grandfather's siblings. Plus, Jimmy, I found out the name of my grandfather's parents.
Oh man.
Yeah, man. It was getting really interesting.
So that you said he was born in
1896.
1896, and you know his parents' name.
Now I know his parents'
So that
names.
goes back even further.
Even
in
went back
1800s.
further.
So that's four generations right there.
Right there. Yeah, yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
that's pretty neat right
yeah,
there.
my father, my grandfather, and now
His
great
father.
grandfather.
Wow.
And his name was William Hanks, or they called him Billy, Billy Hanks. And his wife was Rosetta, or Rose. And I remember when I was talking to Dad, the only thing he remembered was he remembered his grandmother, Rose. And he said that she used to live with him and his parents in their house when they were growing up in Manhattan. And she was a slave.
Wow.
But she grew up with my dad. My
Wow.
dad said he was about 10 years old when she passed away.
Oh man.
Yeah, she was born in 1851,
Wow.
and she died in 1941.
Oh man.
Yeah, and you know what's cold about it is she was born a slave, And, she died in 1941, which was during the time of, segregation.
Right.
So you wonder, did she really ever feel free?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
But she lived a long life. She was like in her 90s when she
Wow.
died, 89, 90.
That's not bad.
Yeah, so I had now the name of my great-grandparents, William and Rosetta Hanks. But the article didn't, it said that they came to Kansas from Mississippi, but it didn't say what part of Mississippi. So now I'm wondering, how am I going to find this out?
Man.
And the librarian at, Kansas librarian said, I can't help you out there. You're going to have to go to Mississippi to find that out. So what did I do next? So then I called, I found out that, I went down to Multnomah County Library, our local library here in Portland. And they told me, well, you should consult the National Archives. They have the federal census records. I said, okay, how do I do that? She says, well, you could write a letter to them and they'll be able to tell you what their holdings are. So I just called, operator again, give me the number to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. So I called them and he says, yeah, we have this federal census records depositories, all the microfilm. And that was back when they had the microfilm. You had to put it on that microfilm reader and turn that. So I says, well, I want to find out about my great-grandparents. I want to find out what part of Mississippi they were from. And is there any way that I could order the films and have, I was ready to just, whatever amount it was, I was ready to put some money down on it because I wanted to find out. I was just hungry to try to find out my history because, I didn't know. And he says, well, you said, well, you don't need to do that. The best thing for you to do is just go to one of our archive branches that are all spread out across the United States. And I says, well, I'm in Portland, Oregon. He says, well, we don't have any in Portland, Oregon, but the closest one is up in Seattle. And I says, okay. And that was only 3 hours away. So there I went, maybe a couple of months later. This is 1990 now. I took some time off from work and I drove, up there. Like you said, we didn't have the Google, we didn't have the, the internet, you could just click. So I had to drive all the way up there, 3 hours.
Oh, man.
Didn't know what I was going to find out, but I had to find out. So I walked in there and they had all these microfilms all on the shelves there. And they had the federal census records there from like 1790 all the way up to 1940 are available to the public, And I guess they cut it off in 1940 because due to privacy, rights and so forth, they have to put a privacy restriction on it for 70 years. So the 1950 census won't come out until, probably 70 years from now. But 1940 just now came out a little bit ago, so it's available. So, and they have indexes all on the wall too. So I asked the staff there how to, help me out. How can I go about finding out what part of Mississippi my great-grandparents, William and Rosetta Hanks, came from? And that's the picture of them here.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, that picture there, that was taken when they were in Manhattan, Kansas at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would date 1800s?
This picture here was probably taken, I think, in the 1900s, because William Hanks, he died in 1918.
Okay.
That's another thing I found is I ordered his death certificate. And that's another thing that you can do when you're doing family research is order the death certificates. If you don't have them here locally, if it's in another state, write a letter to the Vital Records, ask them what the fee is, and just, order it. So I had to order his death certificate, and it said that he died in August of 1918. And that explains why my father never did meet him, because, my father wasn't born until 1930. So, so I was at the archives, and they said, well, you can consult the indexes. And they actually did it for me. They actually did it for me. And they found them, and they came from this county called Carroll County, Mississippi.
Wow.
Yeah.
What part of Mississippi is that?
That is about, I'll say it's about 2 hours from Jackson.
Jackson?
Yeah. It's between Jackson and Memphis, Tennessee. So you're going two ways. One way and two ways the other. It's right about in the middle, right up in the Delta part.
How important is it to find your family tree? Now, let me ask you this. Let me back up. Do they keep enough records on African American families? Because they just discovered a grave site in New York they was building a big old high rise and realized it was a slave grave site, and they stopped it because it was, it was a grave site, and they realized it was African Americans. So, do Caucasian Americans back in the early days, did they keep records on Black American families?
You know, it's amazing how many records there are. There are so many different records that, I mean, we could spend a good couple of hours just, there are a lot of records available now. There are more records coming out than it was when I first started doing it.
Right.
And now you can just go Google,
Right.
and it will just pop up different records that people have been submitting. And like, I heard about that story that you talked about. I haven't really heard into all the details about it, but yeah, there's a lot of records out there on African Americans. There's a lot of documentation coming out. There's a lot of scholars, researchers that are, college students that are researching this, and it's a lot of information. In fact, that is another reason why I had to write this second book, because as Google was getting more popular, and Ancestry.com,
Right.
Heritage Quest,
Yeah.
all of these genealogy websites coming out, Cindy's list and so forth. And there's some African American genealogy websites too.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there's just a lot of tons of research. It's quite amazing. Actually.
Because, in the early 1700s and 1800s, African families were slaves. Now, I know they kept records of what was on their land. I noticed, I seen a couple of them where they showed, 2 black males, 2 black females, 3 black young children. That's could be somebody's family, but they never really put names on them. They just used them as commodity on their land. How can you trace that individual's background if there is no names to them besides the owners?
Yes.
Is that hard to do?
This is the key for African Americans. We have a unique set of things that we need to do to research our family compared to maybe German, French, Italian.
Yeah, because they can trace.
Because they can trace theirs all the way back
to, to their motherland.
Yes.
All the way back to the year 750. African Americans, when they were pulled away from their land, same thing with Native Americans. Do they even have a trace of history of how they can go further beyond the 1700s and 1495? All the years that they say they discovered so many things, I know there's been African Americans here way before 1495, way before all the dates that they claim that they found America and stuff. Is it either harder to go further beyond the 1700s, or is it kind of get stuck right in that area?
You can go farther back. There's some different ways that you can do about it. And in my research, I was amazed at how far back I was able to go. I was able to go as far back as 1735.
Wow.
Was the furthest I was able to go.
So like Alex Haley.
Yes.
He dated his family all the way back to where they came from in Africa.
Yeah.
I know that took him a while, but can other Americans do that? Black American families?
We can do it. We
Is
can
that
do
right?
it. I can't say that we all can do it because it all depends on what records are out there, But I know that we use the same tools that anyone else uses, death certificates, birth certificates, marriage records, funeral homes, newspaper obituaries. We use the same conventional methods just like anybody else. And the federal census records, city directories. The thing that I've learned is, and this is what genealogists have told me, is that you start with what you know and you go back from there. Don't start with what you don't know and think it's going to lead you back up to your family. And some people make that mistake, like say their last name is Johnson and they're from Mobile, Alabama, and they all of a sudden find this slave owner named Johnson in that same city, and they just assume, he must have owned our people or something.
Right.
You can't go that route.
Yeah.
You've got to start from the present and work your way back little by little,
Right.
because it might take you on a total different path. So when it comes to African Americans, let's take for example the census records.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're all free now. We're all Americans now, so we can pretty much find our relatives on the census records. Like I said, 1940 is the most recent one,
Mm-hmm.
and you could go your way back. You probably could find your grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
I could find my grandparents on 1940, 1930 census. Federal census is every 10 years, right?
Right.
And all in all 50 states. And so you could go back 1930, 1920, 1900, and just keep working your way back.
Mm-hmm.
But for African Americans, the furthest that we can go back on the federal census that will show our family names is 1870. Now, for example, I brought over, here is a census of 1880, just to give you an example. And most people probably are familiar with the census records. And this here,
You can sit up there, and maybe they can
you
catch
think
it.
you can see it?
Yeah, they might.
Okay. It's really poor, but you could try it.
Can you grab that, Vaughn? Yeah, maybe. So that's a 1800 census.
This is 1880,
1880s.
Osage County, Kansas census. Now this is a state census.
Mm-hmm.
You have federal census, which is every 10 years. But then you also have state census, which kind of in between. You know, like say federal census 1920, 1930, 1940, they always hit. But the state census are in between. It's like 1925, 1935, something like that there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I have my great-grandparents, their names are listed here, William and Rosetta Hanks. And then it will list their age, it will list their occupation, laborer. Then over here it will list where they were born and where their parents were born.
Mm-hmm.
So for William Hanks, my great-grandfather, he listed that he was born in Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
Which is another question I had, was if he came from Mississippi to Kansas, how did he end up in Mississippi if he was born in Tennessee?
Right.
So that was another question I had. So the census records are really good for that. So like I said, we can go back to 1870 as the last one that we will find
Mm-hmm.
African Americans' full names on there,
Mm-hmm.
because that's 5 years after the Civil War.
Right.
You know, slavery was destroyed by,
Right.
abolished by the Union,
Right.
and so we became free people. The 13th, 14th Amendment was passed, so on and so
Right.
forth. So how do you go beyond 1870, 1860, 1850? Because as you know, then we're getting into slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And what you got to do, or what I did, and is try to identify who the slave owner was.
Right.
And if you can do that,
Mm-hmm.
that will help. You know, that will greatly increase, you know, your chances of being able to go further back.
Some people get offended when you say slave owners and owners of the people. That was the way the world was back then, you know. It's not to offend anybody, but, you know, like you said, this is how most African Americans got here. It's because of slavery.
Yeah.
So when you do your research, I was told not to get offended, because you get upset and you be realizing